Pohl. I'm the head of US healthcare partnerships for Plug and Play. Plug and Play overall is the largest platform in the world to be able to facilitate innovation. We were early investors in Dropbox, PayPal, Guardant Health. We announced two unicorns just this month alone in customer and big ID. And we're also partnered with over 400 large organizations to innovate together on the healthcare side. That includes all the major pharmaceutical companies, the US government, and a lot of large hospital systems. So I help those large companies innovate and find technology that they're going to want to use.
Oh, very good. And I know you have Plug and Play offices here in the Silicon Valley, correct?
Yes, in Sunnyvale, it's our headquarters. And then we have 37 now locations across the globe.
Wow, yeah, and I've actually been to your location in Sunnyvale. So Aaron, take it away.
Great. I don't have 37 locations yet, but maybe one day. So my name is Aaron Morris. I am the CEO of a biotechnology company that's called Postera. Postera was founded back in 2019, really with the aim of using machine learning to improve the process of drug discovery. So we work with some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. We also work with some of the newest and smallest biotechnology companies, effectively trying to help them leverage the kind of latest advances in AI and machine learning to find drugs and cures for patients faster and cheaper than the current status quo.
Wow, that sounds like something pretty relevant to today's situation, doesn't it? So
it's definitely related, yeah.
Yes. So to start with, how would you guys define health tech and maybe diffuse any confusions or misrepresentations that are out there? For example, how is it different from medtech?
I'll start with that one. Medtech, a lot of people, when they think of medtech, they think of medical devices. They think of a physical device that's maybe going to be implanted. Health tech is everything in terms of technology and how it's going to relate to your health. Health tech can even be as broad as the digitized supply chain behind a hospital system. I think maybe the easiest way to maybe look at these things is when you're looking at the company Maru Health. Maru Health is a mental health based company with a digital therapeutic to guide you through different exercises to improve your mental health. And it's using an app. And that app is saying, breathe in, breathe out, things like that. Now, it also has a physical companion device that goes onto your earlobe that's tracking your heart rate variability as you're going through this and giving real-time biofeedback to improve what you're doing. This device that's going to be right here on your earlobe, a lot of people think as this alone as a med tech or a medical device. The other side of what Maru Health is doing, that digital therapeutic, the app, is what is more around health tech. So I think that's a good way to be able to look at the two differences.
Thank you very much. And then Farouk has joined us, so I will let Farouk introduce himself now, and then we'll continue with the question. Hello, Farouk. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Farouk, and I have been in healthcare for most of my life. I'm a software engineer, and I have a master's from Harvard. Brief intro, but I have been doing medical devices for most of my life. And one fine morning, I saw that most of my medical devices that I was inventing was not going to people who need it. And that's where I quit my job and realized that only 23% of world's population gets the medical devices that we need, and the remaining 80% of something we don't serve them well. So that's why I started Bionics, to have medical devices at 1/10 of the cost. So kidney dialysis machine is our first target, bloodless kidney dialysis machine, which is coming out at 1/10 of the cost.
Thank you. And then what was that device again? I think I know what it's for, but can you just repeat that?
Yeah, it's a kidney dialysis machine. So people who can't drink water and can't get out of the body because their kidneys don't work well. So the water has to get out of the body with toxins. So that's what we call kidney dialysis.
Very good. So
you don't want any of my products ever on yourself.
Hopefully I never have to use your product. So Aaron, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, especially as the difference between health tech and what you're actually doing is you're more in the pharmaceutical area, right?
Yeah,
sorry.
Okay. That was for Aaron.
No worries. Yeah, so we operate in the kind of R&D side of developing a drug. which is extortionately expensive and extortionately long in order to bring it to market. And the real challenge is, can you leverage new technologies to take what is typically a 10 or 15-year process and cut it down to something that's going to get to consumers faster? So my company doesn't engage with patients directly, but we work at the kind of starting stage of how do you begin to develop a drug from scratch, from absolutely nothing. Most of the big pharma companies in the world have significantly retracted from this area of the actual process, given the large amount of expense that it is incurred. And so, though I'm not directly engaged with the patients, my company focuses right at that starting journey of trying to find a cure for these end patients.
Very good. So we'll go now to the medical community in general. How successful has Medtech been in treating patients remotely, especially since March of 2020? Do you want to take that, Zach?
I'll take it. It's very hard to say with acute cases where care is needed quickly. There's still really nothing in order to do that in a remote way. We don't have trauma centers in our homes, right? We don't have traveling trauma centers. Now, for chronic care, when you're looking at things like diabetes or high blood pressure and making sure that you're taking your medication, they've been just as successful as they were in the beginning for the people who were using this. Now, obviously, we've seen the adoption of much more people using these remote services, and they're seeing the same success that the people who are taking it pre-pandemic were seeing. And because of that, there's a lot of different advantageous parts to that. You're able to speak with your physician or a nurse more easily because you don't have to get to the clinic or the hospital. It costs less. You're able to use a digital therapeutic in order to make sure that you took your medication and at the right time. So the benefits of using these remote services for these chronic conditions has been just as successful for a much wider audience.
Interesting. And it's interesting that, oh yeah, go ahead, Farouk.
Yeah, I will add a little bit from our perspective. So dialysis was in-center treatment. In America, 11% people get dialysis at home. So when we started this company, part of our goal was to have dialysis at home. And since pandemic took over, so just imagine your mother or grandmother already in that age bracket, which is mostly right up there with a danger zone, 80-year-old or something like that, getting for dialysis. So since then, everybody's calling me, hey guy, for when your machine is coming out, I need this because we need to put our patients in their home. Our machine is in the remote. You don't need a technician or anyone. You can do dialysis at home. And even lately, Trump administration has passed an executive order that they want to move 80% of American dialysis patients to home. So by 2025, from 11 or 12% to 80% is a big shift. So because even before pandemic, but during pandemic, they see, okay, my population is at a high risk because they already kidneys are failed, they already have other health issues, so they are on those red zone. So it's really picking up in our case.
And it's actually, I mean, I can actually add a little bit to this. A very good friend of mine was the head of oncology at UCSF, one of the top cancer universities in the country. And when the pandemic first hit, he actually had, because he was in one of the high risk categories, he actually had an intern walking around with an iPad. So that is how he connected with his patients for like the first 2 or 3 months until he felt it was safe to go back into the hospital.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a direct result where he felt bad because he couldn't give them the care that he thought he really wanted to because he couldn't be with them in person. So, and he's actually a very famous doctor, very nice gentleman. So How do you think, health tech and med tech and all these things are going to affect the designs of modern hospitals and medical facilities in the future?
I can start there. There's going to be a lot of investment that's required in order to be able to take care of patients remotely. We're seeing this huge shift from what we're used to doing in the hospital and then taking that into the home to be able to take care of people. Now, of course, we're going to have, and we're having a lot of early adopters, people who are young, who are tech savvy, who have internet access, who can afford your laptop or to buy a digital blood pressure reader on Amazon, and all these different areas. But what we're going to see and what we're still seeing and what we are seeing is there's a ton of hurdles in order to be able to take care of the vast majority of even Americans. And then you can even start going into different countries because a lot of people don't have internet at their house. They can't afford a computer. A lot of the same issues with kids and remote learning now that we're in a remote learning environment that we're seeing. I believe it's about 50 million children don't have access to internet who really should. And so we need to be putting a lot of investment into there. At the same time, it takes a lot of investment to be able to build new facilities for a new hospital or a new trauma center or a cancer center, et cetera. So we're going to probably, at least in some areas, see a divestment from these certain areas in order to better serve patients in a remote way, because that is going to be so capital intense.
Mm-hmm. And Farouk, your product actually is helping patients move away from the hospital and the centers, correct?
Yes, our product is in at-home dialysis center. But if I add to your question is, if you know that in America we are having a lot of accountable care organizations coming into play since Obamacare. So what does accountable care organizations do is they take money from whatever insurance system it is, and they make sure that the cost of healthcare goes down and patient is taken care of well. So that itself is pushing against the centralized service system. So you remember those days when you used to have PCO, you go somewhere to centralize, and then now everything is remote kind of. So healthcare by accountable care organizations, and if you add Corona and other factors, will get decentralized over time. And that's where some of the services are heading in foreseeable future, which actually Corona is pushing us to get those things earlier than what it was forecasted.
Much earlier. Yeah, decades. Yeah.
Well, and that actually is a good pivot to what Aaron does. So Aaron, I mean, today, without what you're doing, just how timely and expensive is it to bring a new drug to patients?
Yeah, it basically varies, I guess, depending on how large that population is, how difficult the disease area is, but generally somewhere in the range of $1 to $2 billion and somewhere between kind of 10 to 15 years. So significant. More significant than the actual high level numbers, though, is the actual trend. Whereas most technology that has been applied in different industries has substantially reduced the kind of raw metrics of what it takes to produce a unit of value in that industry, the pharmaceutical industry has become more and more inefficient through time, and the return on investment for many pharma companies is less than kind of 1%. And therefore, there's been a decent exodus from the actual early stage of drug development itself. This is a real problem, not just because of those numbers, but because of the trend of those numbers.
That's shocking, actually. I'm assuming, and you can confirm or deny this, that is actually caused some drugs that could have been brought to market to not actually be even started. Is that true?
Yeah, one of the saddest cases of this is antibiotics. Mm-hmm. And for many now around the world, majority of modern antibiotics are just totally ineffective. And even the ones that are effective will rarely ever get prescribed by doctors because the doctors are concerned that effectively the antibiotic resistance will begin to rise and you'll be left with no options. And the problem is that the economics and the commercial incentive behind developing an antibiotics is so low that the pharmaceutical companies are just having to turn around and say, we will make a loss if we develop this drug. And so there have been entire classes now of drugs like antibiotics that have had very little investment for 20 years.
Wow, that is shocking. It's weird because I live literally 2 miles from Gilead Sciences and probably 10 miles from Genentech, and they do seem to be growing. I mean, Gilead just built a whole new building in my town. But you say, is that the exception?
Pharmaceutical companies are absolutely growing, but the kind of increasing therapeutic focus tends to be around cancer and cardiovascular diseases. The actual breadth of diseases that these pharma companies are targeting is not growing. The modalities by which they are trying to target these diseases is absolutely growing, and that's a real exciting advance for science. But the number of disease areas, particularly things like anything to do with the central nervous system, anything that's infectious-based disease, is just sadly not a profitable endeavor for most of these companies.
Wow. So Zach, are you seeing that in the companies that you're seeing at Plug and Play and who you're funding?
Yes, the simple answer is yes, completely agree with what Aaron is saying. To give some context here, Plug and Play, we've partnered, I briefly mentioned it, the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, but that includes Roche, Sanofi, Bayer, Novartis, AstraZeneca, Bayer, Lonza, Grifols, Regeneron, and I know that I'm forgetting some amazing companies. We actually just announced last week Bristol Myers Squibb. So we're working across all these different pharmaceutical companies across countries in different business units, and we're seeing always popping up oncology and cardiac care is what's most important for pharmaceutical companies. And we're not just talking about the development of drugs and therapies for them, but everything around that, being able to educate consumers, being able to educate physicians, being able to track whether patients are taking their medication the right way, which is the right medication at the right time and in the right dose. So everything around the patient experience for the drug that they're taking, and we, like Aaron said, are definitely seeing somewhat of a focus in oncology and cardiac care for the pharmaceutical companies.
Wow, that's interesting. And I'm assuming that's because of the aging population, right? People are living longer and there more people are experiencing these diseases, right?
Somewhat, yes. That's definitely one of the factors. Then we can get into stuff, about anti-inflammatories. And I myself just recently had a knee injury and had to do a steroid round, but I don't want to call myself old yet. But it's certainly one of the factors that we're looking at. I also think one of the main factors that a lot of the pharmaceutical companies are looking at is how can they diagnose diseases earlier, because it works out best for everybody. Number one, they're able to provide better care, they're able to improve patient outcomes, and they're financially incentivized to do so. When your patients live longer, you make more money. So there's a ton of alignment there, which is always fantastic. Doesn't always happen in healthcare, but here there's a lot of alignment everywhere. So we're also seeing that be a huge focus for pharmaceutical companies as well.
Interesting. So, and I'll just do a little personal note. My mom's a nurse, and she always said, "Eat healthy and get plenty of exercise." So, how much is research and things like that are going into proactive healthcare?
Especially in Munich with our pharmaceutical partners, we're seeing a lot of interest in sleep and the gut microbiome. Those are the two areas our pharmaceutical companies are increasingly looking at in order to look at that more holistic version of health.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'd also add the kind of really interesting new area that a lot of the biotechs that we speak to are focused on longevity. And the idea here is that age itself is a disease, and you can treat aging not as this natural phenomenon which is inevitable, but an actual disease that can be cured. Without going into science fiction, etc., the underlying question becomes, how does one define aging? How does one find the relevant biological hypotheses that can drive aging, and how do you fix aging? I say that because as of right now, the best solution is still eat well, sleep well, and exercise as the cure for aging. But nonetheless, this is a rapidly growing field that I spend a lot of time talking to companies about.
Yeah, and Farouk, what about, in the realm of dialysis? I mean, how much is being done to prolong lives? Because I know that has, dialysis, that disease, I forget the disease, diabetes, you're right, does kill people early, right?
Yes, so diabetes kills people early in every shape and form, and and I've worked a lot on diabetes as well. We have another program which is working on artificial pancreas with a couple of universities, and to your surprise, at least 4 companies are coming with what we call artificial pancreas or closed loop insulin delivery systems in next year. So, and I got a chance to work on fair amount of those. So diabetes itself, we will not be able to cure as such cure in near future, but in 2021, by the end of 2021, you will have at least 4 companies offering you closed loop insulin delivery system, which we call artificial pancreas, which will stop or halt the side effects of diabetes on your body, which includes kidney failure and all sorts of horrible things to your body. So that's one aspect which is coming out, and is you will be able to prolong your life and quality of life. And we already have millions of children which are on type 1 diabetes on insulin pumps and insulin storage systems. I worked about 10 years on these pumps. We wrote software, hardware development for those 5 of those out there. So a type 1 diabetes used to die in 15 years or something in a lot of cases. Now you can carry that same child all the way to their 80s while maintaining the quality of life. Similar is the case with dialysis. Dialysis patients used to die in 2 to 3 months max. With a good machine, we can keep a person alive for another 15, 20 years. And most of the diabetic patients don't die because of kidney failures or other stuff. They eventually die for other reasons, for example, cardiac arrest or whatever. This stuff happens. So these are the things where we can keep a person alive for a very long time. I'm hoping that someday we will have artificial kidney as well, but that's still about 10 years or 15 years away from the market. But we have technologies that keep us alive very long time.
Well, 10 to 15 years is really not that long, so, and I actually had another friend of mine works for a company funded by Larry Page and Sergey Brin, that their goal is to increase the longevity of life to 150 years. That's the stated goal. And they hire Stanford PhDs in the medical field. They're the ones doing the research. So I know they're looking to do some stuff on this. I don't know if you guys have heard of this company or not.
No, there is. And when I was at Harvard, I have some friends. The company is worth about $600 million from Boston area, something like that. They are also working on longevity of life and something like biosciences, something like that. There are multiple companies. It's not just science fiction. There are companies. We may not have an infinite life, but we may be able to increase by 15, 20 years or 25 years in our foreseeable future. That I mean by 15, 20 years, within 15, 20 years or something. Yes, it's not pure fiction. There is some work going on there.
Well, they do say that the first person that will live to 150 years is alive today. So it is coming.
It is coming.
Yeah, so interesting. So I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence now in just a little bit. It's becoming a critical part of health tech and med tech. What do you guys, are you guys dealing with that at all? Do your products use any artificial intelligence, or any of your, like in your case, Zach, the companies you're partnering with?
Yes, there's a lot of different companies that we have in our network that are using AI. I think the easiest way to be able to look at an example is a partnership that we facilitated between the Cleveland Clinic and Giant. Giant is an AI text-based platform, RoboChat. And the reason that we started it was the Cleveland Clinic. They came to us and they said, our nurses are spending an incredible amount of time calling post-discharge patients. I've heard the stat before that nurses spend up to 20% of their time just on hold, which is incredible. So what we did was we introduced them to Giant, and they did a pilot where Giant sent a very simple text message to all of the post-discharge patients. How are you feeling? Do you need to come back in? And then it would use its AI algorithm in order to follow up. Now, there's a lot of different ways to construct your AI around how to follow up, and whether it's going to be open or whether you need to follow prompts, and you're using centralized neural networks and things like that. But in Giant's case, we're seeing other companies like Hyro take advantage of some of those things. But in Giant's case, it was prompt, you answered the questions, you went down, and then it was kind of like a virtual front door where then it made a recommendation based off of all of your answers, and a lot of decision tree analysis baked into there as well. Side note, decision tree analysis is different than AI. A lot of people in healthcare mess that up. But it was a blend of the two. And they were able to reduce the amount of time that nurses spent calling the post-discharge patients by 39%. And they were also able to reduce 30-day readmission rates by 30% by providing better advice in terms of what the patient should do, and because of better contact rates and things like that. So it was able to have a clear incentive, a financial incentive for the hospital and the nurses, as well as patient outcomes. And now the pilot has expanded to multiple different units of the clinic. And Giant is a much bigger deal than they were back then a couple of years ago. They're quite well known these days. But that's a very simple example of how AI is being used in order to treat patients.
And Aaron, how about in the pharma business, in the drug discovery process? How is AI being used there?
Yeah, I guess AI has really only begun to become a fruitful place, I would say, for drug discovery, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. Ultimately, AI generally needs a lot amount of data, and ideally clean data. You can have that when interacting with humans, because there's a lot of humans and there's a lot of talk, so your models can continue to improve. It's why the most advanced algorithms tend to be in the natural language processing space or computer vision, where you've got extensive amounts of images. The problem with where I operate in is that you are dealing with effectively chemistry that you are trying to get toward being a drug. And the input data, if you will, is effectively the results of experiments. So you feed your model some experiments, and you try and get the model to ideally use that information to design a better, safer, more potent, more effective molecule. To get that data, though, is incredibly expensive. And to clean that data is very, very difficult because experiments are noisy. So it's only really the last 5 years, with the kind of advance of particularly cloud computing and neural nets, that you've been able to use AI. So I'll just give an example. We use it across 3 different parts of drug discovery, but I'll just give one example. A really challenging part of when you're at this R&D stage is actually how to make molecules. So you can think about this process as almost chemical Lego. You start with very simple pieces of chemistry. They're referred to as building blocks. And you effectively combine them into something that is more complex. And that more complex entity becomes a drug candidate that you then test. There are well over 10 billion building blocks available on the internet. You can combine them in a number of ways, such that there are more potential drug candidates than there are atoms in the universe. So you've got a huge amount of what's known as chemical space, options from which you can try and pick a drug candidate and test it. And one of the ways to figure out which one should I go for is which one can I make easily. And so at Posterior, what we've done is pioneer a kind of new architecture and a new machine learning model to figure out the best way to make molecules. We can actually do this and match the kind of top human chemist experts in the world now. And we effectively use that technology to help get compounds made across different manufacturers around the world. We hook up to their inventory, so we know exactly what starting materials they have, and then we use AI to design molecules based on that. Just as a case study, we run a project called COVID Moonshot, where we're basically trying to find an antiviral. We basically were given a list of 2,000 ideas, and if you were a chemist to figure out how to make 2,000 molecules, it would generally take 3 or 4 weeks. We were able to do that in about 48 hours using the kind of models that we've built. So AI is not just going to save the world by itself, but it is able to do quite a lot now in this kind of research stage of drug discovery.
Right. And Farouk, how about in the dialysis business? Is AI used at all in that, or in post delivery of the product?
Yeah. So AI is used is not like so I walk away and an AI bot comes in and says, I know. So it's in bits and pieces at different stages. So for example, within our medical device, within our dialysis machine, there are 3 different stages where we are using AI. There is some image processing, which we used to do it without AI. Now we do it with AI. That helps us in accuracy and better performances. Then our machine generate a lot of data. So they're IoT enabled devices, and we collect all those data, all that data, and then we run some AI models to look into 3 things. One is we sell this data to pharmaceutical companies. So pharmaceutical companies buy this data because instead of conducting any trial of human behavior into certain areas in dialysis field, you have to bring in 30, 40 people, but we say, okay, we have 50,000 patients out there and we can run you all sorts of queries, and AI models help us. And we can't develop a drug, but we can give you enough data which can help you think through that where the problems are, where you can go. So we are a small piece in the solving that jigsaw puzzle. That's another area. We hired Gaper also to build some AI models. Those AI models is for compliance with the machine. So a lot of people don't comply with their drug intake, or they don't comply with their device usage. And when they don't comply, okay, so your son or child, mother, daughter can say, hey mom, you missed 3 therapies, what's going on? So those AI models helps us keep the followers. We have a follower model into certain medical devices where a loved one becomes a follower, and so it gives you a call. Why you're missing those? And then she says, hey, I know. Okay, sorry, I will not miss that. So that's where certain compliances where we are using AI models are helping us in keeping people in good health.
Interesting. So I'm going to talk about the future now a little bit, or ask about the future, and I'm going to ask each of you a different part of it. So Zach, I'll ask you, what do you think is the future of the hospitals with health tech? And Aaron, what do you think the future of R&D drug discovery would be like? And Farouk, for you, it would be the creation of products that come into the home and things like that. So Zach, you want to start us off on the future of hospitals in the future?
The future of hospitals, it's a really tough one.
I know.
Hospitals will, for a very long time, I think it's a safe bet, be a place where acute care is required, or where it's being delivered. Trauma cases, car crashes, things like that. It will also be a place where a lot of people, especially who are not as tech savvy or have the resources in order to get diagnosed and treated, etc., get their care, get diagnosed, have their follow-ups, things like that. But then the new functionality of a hospital will also be being a distributor for people who aren't as tech savvy. A lot of Medicaid and Medicare patients, maybe they are tech savvy, but they don't have the resources in order to facilitate being treated at the home. So sending them their blood glucose monitors, things like that, educating them all of those different things. So there'll be a new function that hospitals will need to provide on top of what they already do. And they'll also see some decrease, and they'll be able to reallocate resources because we're going to see people who have the resources, who are tech savvy, being treated for chronic diseases more in the home.
Thank you. And then Aaron, how about in the drug discovery R&D? What do you think that's going to look like in the future?
Yeah, so I think you can really boil this down to a transition from trial and error to simulation. And what I mean by that is industries, for example, such as designing a bridge or an architect for a building or an engineer for a building generally doesn't build a building, see what the problems are, tear the building down, and then rebuild the building again, and hopefully it's better than the last one. You have sophisticated physics-based models that allow you to simulate what different architectures will translate to in the real world. In drug discovery, we sadly do the former. You try a drug candidate, you fail, you then spend a lot of money to test another one, and you continue to do that, trying to learn through the trial and error process. And you can see how that's incredibly suboptimal. And that's not because pharmaceutical companies are lazy, it's because science is really hard. And simulating how drugs will affect the body, simulating how potent it will be, how toxic it will be, how soluble it will be, whether it will get metabolized in the bloodstream, all of these are very challenging problems. But what you're gradually seeing is a data-driven approach gradually beginning to augment what current chemists can do, and eventually be able to move away from a trial and error approach to a simulation-based approach. And naturally, you can see then that the cost of drug development should drop quite dramatically, the point at which you can simulate in a model the properties of the drug that you're developing. And again, the hope is that this should incentivize much more research and R&D into different disease areas, because the kind of barrier to entry and the access to developing a drug through technology has been lowered. So that's kind of really what, again, Posterior hopes to continue to pioneer and advance.
Interesting. And then Farouk, when it comes to medical devices, what do you think the future of that is, to build, companies like yourself that build medical devices for the end consumer?
Yeah, future is very exciting. I can't even tell you how exciting it is. So every time I see myself 5 years back or 10 years back, or every device I pick it up, we already have 2 devices in pipeline. One we are about to launch in a few months, and we already have patients on it. Another one is a little behind on the pipeline. Is the one is I was talking about kidney dialysis, and the other one is insulin delivery. So just you need to see that laser technology has been improving a lot. You have to see ultrasound has been improving a lot. Then you see that imaging, medical imaging and camera quality. So $1 camera is better than what it used to be, a DSLR or that kind of stuff. So, and then we have on top of it, a few other technologies. And then you put 4G and 5G on top of it, where you have cloud servers and all that interconnectivity. So every time my partners and I, we look at 2 or 3 medical devices, we say, oh, this is the time to redo it. So let's open it up. And whenever we redo any device, it is 3-4x cheaper. It's 3-4x faster. It's 3-4 times compact, and it is 3 to 4 times more efficient and effective than the previous one. And for example, I was in St. Louis, Missouri, and I was talking to some of the nephrologists. They said, look at this new dialysis machine, and we just got it. I said, Mark, this was 9-year-old in our books. So the rollout is more slower, but the innovation we can do is right there. You just look at the technologies around there and apply them, and you get amazing results. It's a time to, for example, in 15 years, can you imagine a lot of internal combustion engine cars out there? Probably not. Similarly, all the internal combustion engine and all those medical devices are going away. It's all newer technologies coming in. So all the guts of the machine will change.
Well, thank you. So, and now I'm going to pivot to Aaron, because I know Aaron's got a special project going on. He mentioned it briefly earlier. It's called the Moonshot Project. So if you could tell us what that is and what's unique about it.
Yeah, sure. So COVID Moonshot is a open source effort to find a COVID antiviral. Now, if you really want to try and, I guess, put this pandemic behind us, at least from a therapeutic side, you need both vaccines and antivirals. And just in case it's not clear to anyone, if you are sick, if you are on a ventilator in a hospital, a vaccine is very, very unlikely to be of any use to you. What you need is an antiviral, an actual cure for the virus that is already in your system. So you really need both. And so the initiative called COVID Moonshot began in March, where we saw, my company Postero saw some data that was released by Oxford University. And what we decided to do was say, well, why don't we take this data and rather than run with it ourselves, why don't we invite scientists from around the world to suggest their ideas as to how to take this preliminary data and turn it into an actual antiviral drug candidate. And importantly, we're not going to patent it. We're not going to have any intellectual property. We're going to keep it as open source as possible, because that will ensure that the drug that does hopefully result is very, very cheap and very therefore accessible to everyone. A lot of the critique of the way that we do modern medicine is that developed nations always get a massive head start when it comes to accessing new cure compared to developing nations. And a really obvious reason for that is cost. So we wanted to develop something that was cheap. So we basically, as a company that was 6 months old, we just made a website. We put up this data and said, does anybody want to help? I think, to be honest, Mark, we maybe expected like 50 or 100 ideas from scientists around the world. We've now got well over 15,000, which has been really amazing. And not only that, but we've had about 30 different organizations come on board with us and say, why don't we actually just take this from being an idea on a website and actually experiment and test them in a lab? So of the 15,000 ideas, we've actually made and tested about 1,300 of them. We found about 30 that actually can kill the virus in like a live human cell. And right now we're actually testing these drug candidates in animal testing, which is really, really exciting. And so in 9 months, it's become the world's largest open source drug discovery effort. I think is really giving people hope that where commercial incentives may not exist, that there is this interconnected community around the world that if you can pull them together and organize them and give them a very clear mission, you can actually get a long, long way. So our hope is to go into human trials with the world's first ever open source drug next year, which would be a phenomenally exciting event. And I guess right now the focus is on raising funds to help us get there.
So that's a perfect segue to anybody that's listening, how can they help with these funds?
Yeah, if anyone's listening, if you are a scientist, you can go on our website. Every piece of data that we've generated is public. It's displayed live. Every experiment, every result is there, and you can help us inform those results. If you feel that this is an important initiative that you want to back and you want to help us, we basically need about $1.5 million to get us through all of the animal testing that is needed. We already have 2 international organizations that are giving us their support to move into human trials. So I'm asking if there are people out there that you would like to donate toward this cause. We have a GoFundMe. All of the spending is transparent and visible to see what we're doing. And if you would like to donate toward that cause, I'd ask you just to check out the site, donate on the GoFundMe, and if we can hit this 1.5 million, that will go a long, long way to moving this antiviral even into human testing early next year.
Wow, that is really worthwhile. And I hope everybody listening will help in some way. And I have to ask, I mean, do you think you could actually apply this concept to other things like cancer research and heart research and things like that?
I have been amazed by how far we have come so far. I will add, though, that I think the reason why it has moved incredibly quickly is because there really is a very global concerted effort and everyone is feeling the pain of this pandemic. So I think that you really do need that community emphasis. I'm not sure that that exists for just any disease area that you want to go afterwards. But I do think, for example, Mark, in areas like antibiotics, for example, it would be a amazing kind of initiative to say, well, big companies are not incentivized to research in this area, so why don't we take a crowdsourcing approach? So actually speaking with folks in the UK who are trying to pioneer new approaches for developing antibiotics. And we hope that COVID Moonshot can actually act as a helpful precedent for areas that are under-researched and that are underfunded like that.
Cool. And then you just tell us what the URL for the Moonshot project is.
Sure, yeah, if you just go on our site, so it's postera.ai, so postera.ai /COVID. And you will see all of the data, all of the headline stats on that site. And I'd be more than happy. There's emails on the site for how to get in touch with us. I will respond to anyone very, very quickly if you do reach out.
Very good, thanks. Well, gentlemen, I'm gonna finish with one question, and I'm gonna ask it of all three of you. And it's a more generic question because we've been talking about, you know, what you gentlemen do and what your partners do, but we haven't talked about the patient yet. Right? So what do you all think about, what is the patient's journey going to be like going forward into the future? So Zach, you're top left, so why don't you start us off?
I'll start us off. The best analogy is we will see the patient journey or the patient experience be much more similar to the patient journey and experience for any other industry, like a brand and retail company, maybe like a L'Oreal and buying products, or looking at products on Instagram. It's going to be much more like that, where we're interacting for the first time digitally through our phones. We're evaluating options through our phones, and then maybe we'd want to go to a Lululemon to get more customized options or to look more, or maybe we need to go to the store. We're going to be going there, to the hospital. And then we will be engaging more so back in a virtual way, whether it's through getting billed through our computers and paying through our computers and things like that. Obviously, that's going to be more for chronic conditions and diagnostics, as opposed to other disease areas. But that's one that we feel pretty confident of happening within the next 10 years.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. So Aaron, same question to you. What will the patient's journey be like?
I'm going to actively avoid that question a little bit because I'm nowhere near as informed as Zach about this. But I do want to say something in that why I think there is great optimism for the patient, Mark, if you don't mind me slightly hijacking your question.
Of course.
I think it's really interesting to look over history as to where the kind of top educated parts of the population go to for the workforce. I think if you've gone back kind of 20, 25 years, your top graduates, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, where do they naturally gravitate? And you would generally say kind of like finance, banking, law. I think in the last kind of 10 years, it's been Google, big tech, Facebook. What you're really seeing now is the startup scene is becoming the default go-to place for a lot of the kind of top, most talented graduates around the world. And in particular, the industry that I see, and I'm very biased to say so, is that people are very committed to healthcare because tech has lost some of its sexiness in a way. Big tech is now seen as a bad phrase. Big banks are seen as a bad phrase. But there is this real social concern among younger people, among the younger generation, that after going through their education, they want to have a meaningful impact on the world. And what better way than to apply cutting edge technology, very natural unification of what these people are interested in. So I think you're going to have a huge growth in the number of biotech entrepreneurs, in the number of health tech entrepreneurs, in the number of people starting companies to make a dent. And for that reason, I'm very excited that I think the patient can be incredibly optimistic about the future that the market is going to be delivering to them.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'll put in a little plug for the local universities. I live right between Berkeley and Stanford, and I am seeing that too. A lot of kids are coming out and going right into the medical profession in technology or some other form. So Farouk, what do you think? What do you think of what the patient's journey will be like in the future?
So just think that when Henry Ford was making the car, right? Everybody will question him, oh, who's going to buy a car and who can afford the car, whatever. And fast forward 20 years or 30 years. And same story is with the cell phones. We saw in our lifetime, people said, who's going to buy that expensive cell phone that the guy in New York has? Like, it's not needed, whatever. So when I started this company, as Aaron said, that everybody said me, I was saying, who is going to buy a dialysis machine at home? And I said, okay, if I give you a dialysis machine at the cost of 4 treatments at home, and what about not only in the US, but people in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they will be able to afford that at the cost of 2 months of treatments. At home, they will just get the machine and they would do it themselves at home. And you're like, you're crazy, you're nuts. So every machine which is out there, which performs this bloodless dialysis, is costing $17,000 to $27,000. Our machine is starting at costing us around $700 as of today. So I'm just giving you an example that if technology is applied right, we will have all these gadgets, and rather than having these bulky big machines, our machine is relatively smaller and pretty easy to carry on the plane and everything. So machines will be smaller, intelligent, 4G, 5G connected, and would be far more affordable, and they would be like nice and clean rather than hard to use with a lot of buttons and this and that. If you see newer like spaceships or whatever, they are like much simpler than the 20,000 knobs. So the patient journey, and then the doctors are well connected with apps and AI and all that stuff is all there baked in. So patient journey, we would not be able to extend the life, like extension of life as medical device companies, but we can care so much that you may not fall into traps where one disease leads to another one if the first one is not taken care of well. So if your kidneys are failing, we take care of your kidneys very well so that you last 20 years on those failed kidneys, that kind of stuff. So we are very patient centric. We spend human factor studies. We do all sorts of stuff. We instead of shipping it right away, we wait for another 6 months to improve it from this patient-centric approach. But we are getting very patient-centric. Long answer to your question, but yes, the future is exciting for patients as well.
Good. Well, it sounds like, yeah, it sounds promising. I'm like I said, my mom's 91. I hope to at least live to her age and maybe a little bit longer. Before we go, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give each one of you a chance to introduce yourself again and your company and tell us what you do. So Zach, why don't you start?
As a reminder, my name is Zachary Pohl. I lead U.S. healthcare partnerships for Plug and Play. We consider ourselves the largest platform in the world to facilitate innovation. To give some other insights than I gave at the beginning, we are the most active digital healthcare investor in the world. We've made 75 investments to date, our unicorn being Guardant Health, which is now the NASDAQ with a market cap of around $8 billion. We've made 15 investments this year alone into digital health, that's across digital health. And we have 6 locations that we're specifically running healthcare accelerators for: Silicon Valley, Cleveland, Munich, Shanghai, Kyoto, and Singapore, as well as sourcing out of Sao Paulo, Bangkok, and Abu Dhabi. And then working with 35 healthcare organizations in order to improve innovation in healthcare.
Wow, great. Farouk, you want to take that? What's the name of your company and what your product is?
Yeah, so my name of my company is Bionics, and we are developing next generation kidney dialysis machine. And the reason for doing it is healthcare is killing our economy, and I want to crack down the price. I want to make it cheaper, affordable, better, and a next generation in every shape and form. So our bloodless machine, overseas, 72% people get hepatitis C from dialysis centers. And if we just remove the blood and we get dialysis done without even touching your blood, then we can save those people from HIV and hepatitis C. So that's where we are, and we already have 7 human on our machine, and amazingly, we have spent less than $2 million to get to this point that we are out. This is the first time in my life that we are. It's such a tight budget we are able to get to this far, and later next year we will be submitting to FDA, and currently we have a size of 30 people as of now. But we are growing faster because of amazing clinical results, and then we have second what we call artificial pancreas or closed loop insulin delivery system coming in and filing IPs for that. So that's where we are.
Thanks. And can you, for our listeners, can you tell them your website? Spell it out.
Yeah, it's Bionics, BYONYKS, with all the I's it's converted to Y's. BYONYKS.com.
Okay, thank you. And Aaron, why don't you take us away? Talk to us about Postera and Project Moonshot.
Sure. So my name's Aaron Morris. I'm the CEO of Postera. And Postera's real focus is on using machine learning to improve the way that we discover new drugs. We have spent the last year as a company doing 3 things. The first thing that we've done is launch COVID Moonshot. It's become the world's largest open source drug discovery effort. We have gone from a few ideas on a website to actual drugs now being tested in animals. We hope to go to human trials next year. Alongside that, we've also been working with large pharmaceutical companies and small biotech companies to help them develop their own drug candidates. We've closed deals with Pfizer. We've closed deals with brand new biotechs just started out of Chicago and the Bay Area. And whether that's for Alzheimer's disease, whether it's for cocaine addiction, we work with a lot of these companies to help use machine learning. Finally, we have actually launched a product that is a solution to how to make molecules. So this is a product called Manifold. It's a SaaS product. Much of the basic research around the world now in drug discovery is being done by new virtualized biotechs who outsource a lot of their work. And a big problem when you're a new biotech is, how do I make my molecules? Manifold, which is our product, solves that for you. There is a free version on our website. Please go play around if you're a chemist or if you're a drug hunter out there. We'd love to find ways to help you.
Well, gentlemen, I really want to thank all 3 of you for your time today. It's been fascinating talking to you. It gives me hope that, I am going to make it to 91. I'm 63 now. So, and I'm sure you younger guys will also make it to there, I'm sure. So I feel better from just having talked to you gentlemen for an hour. So I want to thank you again and have a great night. And Aaron, I know it's late there, so good night.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, the live stream is off and I'll stop the recording.